I was taking out all my own sutures. I was answering the phones myself, sending out the inquiries. I was my own marketing specialist.
Hello and welcome to Beauty and the Biz, where we talk about the business and marketing side of plastic surgery. I'm your host, Catherine Maley, author of Your Aesthetic Practice, as well as my new book called Plastic Surgery Practice Growth Playbook. And it was interviewing the 175 top plastic surgeons on my podcast. So please get a copy of that. It's got a lot in there. And I'm also a consultant to plastic surgeons to get them more patients and more profits. Now, today's special guest is Dr. Anthony Admire. And I just love the name Admire for our industry. I admire plastic surgery. That's a really good name and I can remember it. So he's a board certified plastic surgeon who is founder of Admire MD Plastic Surgery and Admire MD Skin and Wellness Clinic. They're located in Scottsdale and Arcadia, Arizona. So Dr. Admire is a native Arizonan. He received his medical degree at the University of Arizona, his general and plastic surgery residency in St. Louis, and then returned home to Tucson, Arizona to be an assistant professor of surgery and acting chief of plastic surgery at the University of Arizona College of Medicine for 8 years. In 2007, he went out into private practice and hasn't looked back. Dr. Admire, welcome to Beauty and the Biz podcast. It is a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Sure. So I'd like to start out, I usually start out with your journey from private practice, or actually from the hospital setting to the private practice. But with you, I want to back up. Can we just talk about your childhood?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show or pre-show, my name is very unique. And so I have patients that come in and ask me, is that really your last name? Did you change that name based on what you do? And I wish I could say I did. I was that creative to do that, but that's actually my adopted name. So it's a German background. My dad is born and raised on a farm in Indiana, and my mom as well. And they got married shortly after college, and my dad joined the military. He was in the Army for 20 years, a retired lieutenant colonel. And so, there's not a lot of admirers around the country. And I maybe run into one in Arizona, but it's a very unique name. It's definitely very fitting for what I do, and I love it. And so my wife loves it. She had a great French last name before we got married, but she loves Admire as well too. So it's very fitting.
Oh, that's fantastic. But you said you were adopted. Can you tell us where you're adopted from?
Yeah, so I was born in South Korea. So it's it's a very personal, but actually I'm very open about my childhood. And so my sister and I, we were orphaned, so we don't know our birth parents. So this was in Seoul, South Korea. So somehow we ended up in an orphanage in South Korea. And so they figured I was probably like two. My sister was probably about 2 years older. And I say probably because the orphanage didn't know anything about our birth parents. They just gave us birth dates based on how old they thought we were. So, which is another fascinating story in and of itself, because, my birthday is December 29th, 1970, but that probably isn't my birth date. There's 364 other days that they could have chosen as my birth date. But so we were assigned birth dates. And so my dad he and my mom were stationed in South Korea. So he was in the military, in the Army, as I said before. And they tried for many years to have children on their own and were unsuccessful. So when they were in Korea, there was an orphanage. It was actually run by an American woman, Jane White, about as American name as you can get. So she ran the orphanage. A lot of his fellow Army friends also adopted from that same orphanage, and they had a special relationship with the Army base that my dad was stationed at. They went there and they were going to, or they, saw all the children. They picked out my sister. She was one of the oldest kids in the orphanage. So this is actually, quite just kind of telling on, what kind of parents I had. The in the Asian cultures, having a boy is very important, and so, my sister, being a female and being older, had a very little chance of being adopted, and so they wanted to give her a chance. And then, of course, nearly immediately after they picked her, they found out that we were a biological brother and sister, and so they kept us together, and they adopted us both. And so we were in Korea for about 2 years while he finished his tour of duty in South Korea. And then, even before we made our permanent home in Arizona, we went straight to Indiana. And so both my mom's side of the family and my dad's side of the family, they're all from Indiana. So we met all of our new relatives on both sides of the family, and stayed there for a few months. And then he got stationed to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, so which is a military army base south of Tucson, about 2 hour drive south. So that's kind of, that's how I ended up in the U.S. and being, we I learned English very quickly. Got both my sister and myself got thrown into a U.S. only speaking school in South Korea. And her being a little older, she kind of had to learn English much faster because kids her age had a little bit more advanced language than I did. And but we just I haven't been back to South Korea yet. I'm actually going later this year, on a cruise with my wife and some friends, and so it will be very nostalgic. I certainly don't remember a lot about Korea. Didn't get exposed to much, but it's going to be really quite cool to go back to Seoul, where I was born, and just kind of just see where I grew up.
That's amazing. I'm just so, that's probably a story in itself and a book in itself, because that's a pretty big culture shock. Just
Sure.
speaking of Seoul, South Korea, I do have a client over there and it
Oh,
is intense. It is, I mean, it is like the mecca of plastic surgery. And they're all on
yeah.
the same block that like their Park Avenue is like times 10 ours.
That's what I heard, and so much innovation comes from South Korea, not only the
Yeah.
surgical, but now the skincare. You've heard of Korea Skin, Korean Glass, all these regenerative therapies, all these technologies, devices, lotions and potions, and there's a new sunscreen that was actually started out in South Korea that's just got FDA approved in the US. And supposedly the sunscreen is going to be a game changer, and all the sunscreens are going to kind of switch to this Korean sunscreen or this Korean, sunscreen formulation.
I use it now. I use Korean
Oh,
sunscreen
hey, there you
because
go.
I have such fair skin and it can't touch the sun. And it's amazing. It's a beautiful sunscreen. If it gets any better, this is fantastic because that's pretty good as it is. So let's talk about, now we're going to fast forward. You were in Korea, then you're in Indiana, then you're in Arizona. Holy cow.
Right.
Okay, now you're in school in America. You somehow become a doctor. I don't know where
Yes.
you got that from because
Yeah.
your father certainly wasn't a doctor.
Yeah.
Where'd you get that idea to be a doctor? And then a
Yeah,
surgeon?
that's a great question because it definitely uh, that my path wasn't set for me. So I didn't have any family members,
Mm.
both on my dad's side and my mom's side, that were in medicine, and so it just kind of I kind of created my own path. But it took me a while to discover medicine, early on in childhood. But I did, have kind of a tragic story. My adopted mom passed away, died suddenly, actually, from a ruptured brain aneurysm when I was 13 years old. She was 43 years old.
Dear Lord.
And so it's, it was something that, my sister and I left for school that morning. We kissed our mom goodbye to go to school. And when we got home, our family friends were there waiting for my sister and I, and took us straight to the hospital and told us, what happened. So, That I had no idea what brain aneurysm was or any type of aneurysm, and why she died. And certainly, I was very good in school. Early on, from kindergarten on, I always excelled in the classroom. And so, I was always a very curious student. And so I really wanted to know a lot more about my mom's condition, why it happened. And, in doing that, she was kind of in that, perfect category where these types of events happen. She was in her mid 40s. She was a smoker. Unfortunately, both her and my dad smoked, and they
Mhm.
took it up when they were in the military together. And she had high blood pressure, and so that's kind of a perfect storm for brain aneurysms to develop. And so fast forwarding to when I was in residency and did my ICU, surgical ICU rotations, took care of a lot of patients and there were, predominantly women in the mid 40s. And, some survived and some didn't. And sometimes it's just a random luck based on, how quickly you can get someone to a hospital to perform, resuscitation measures, where the location of the aneurysm is. That is makes a huge difference. And incidentally, a coincidence that my sister married, her husband 30 some odd years ago, and his mom died from the exact same thing that our mom died of. And she was also in her mid 40s and had high blood pressure and smoked, and she was overweight. That's also another a factor. My mom wasn't, but it's something that made me really focus on medicine at that point. And here we are.
Wow. What a story you have. So now you're in another fast forward, and now you're the chief of plastic surgery in a hospital setting or university setting, right?
Sure.
So,
Yes.
all right. So that was you were there a long time, like let's say 8 years. One of the biggest questions in this podcast is how did you have the nerve, the guts, the courage, the vision, the foresight to say enough is enough? I want to do my own thing. What was that journey like?
Yeah, so it was actually only for 2 years, but it seemed like 8 years because I was a very, very busy surgeon. And so, I got a lot of criticism from my program director in St. Louis for making that choice because I didn't do a fellowship coming out of a residency where, most plastic surgeons, once they complete their training, now they kind of micro focus on what they want to do, whether it be aesthetics, hand surgery, pediatrics. There's so many different paths that a plastic surgeon can take once they complete their training. And so, I was from Tucson, spent the majority of my childhood there, and went to college there as well too. And so I was and medical school, so I was very familiar with a lot of the faculty that were at the hospital at the time at the university hospital. And so they recruited me even during residency, early residency, to come back. And so I went back. So I ran so we didn't have a plastic surgery residency, but I helped train some of the general surgeons that rotated through plastics. Also had medical students as well too. And so, it's something that I knew that I would get a lot of just on the job training, which you never really want to say that as a surgeon, but it's also kind of really helps sharpen your decision making. And because in a university setting, as you can imagine, it was a very busy cancer hospital, very big research hospital. So I had every single breast reconstruction or breast cancer patient that came in through the university system. I had, every single facial trauma patient that came into that hospital, had every hand trauma patient that came into that hospital, burn patient, whatever situation where they needed a plastic surgeon, I was the guy, and I was the only surgeon on staff. that was employed by the hospital. So, I when I took my boards. So you typically take your get board certified or take your boards about in 2 years after your training, and because it really takes that long to collect that many cases to qualify for the board exam. And I had I think like 10 times the number of cases when I sat for my boards because I was so busy. And but unfortunately, with budget cuts and short on faculty, it's really I was very burnt out and I was exhausted, and so it wasn't a sustainable situation for a single plastic surgeon to run a very busy university surgical program. So
But you put out what you needed, and that was surgical
yes,
experience. I
exactly.
mean, the best surgical experience is either like a franchise, or Kaiser. We have Kaiser out here, or the
Sure.
army, or the university. So
Right.
kind of bit what you wanted. But when did you decide? Okay, I'm done with that, and I'm going to go. How much planning went into that? Because there was no fellowship, so you didn't get a lot of business
Yeah.
and marketing.
Yeah. That's a great question. So, I've always been able to learn, very quickly, and so I didn't necessarily think a fellowship, um, at least for me, and a lot of people, they need it or want it, or they get more confidence. For me, I'm a very visual person. I could see a surgery one time, almost kind of like a photographic memory, and where I could see a procedure. And so I would go to a lot of meetings where now, okay, well, aesthetics. And it wasn't because of the money, because I certainly did a lot of reconstructive surgery even when I started my own practice, and I really enjoyed it. And but I really started to have more focus in aesthetics, and it's and so I went to meetings. I also, saw a lot of, watch a lot of videos, from QMP, and the ones that do really high quality videos. But really, in person and going to meetings, I could see a surgery and say, okay, well, I'm going to start doing that. That looks like that works, and this person is a great surgeon and has great outcomes, and someone that I really respect. So I found a few surgeons along the way, early during my career, where, okay, well, they're obviously doing something right. I'm going to learn, kind of how they do a facelift. And so, that was really what kind of inspired me to, kind of get into aesthetics, but specifically facial rejuvenation. I do a lot of facelifts. That's about 90% of my practice. And you asked me earlier before we came on air that you don't even advertise that you're a breast and body guy, and I really don't, because I will do that for my facelift patients because they always come back for more. It seems like, and or if they have a daughter or a family member that needs a breast surgery or something like that, I will do it. But I really enjoy face. I call it the golden age of the facelift, and it's because you see about it, hear about it. It's all over the news, all over social media, and I really feel like I've connected with a lot of facial plastic surgeons, or plastic surgeons that do a lot of facelifts from around the world, and we're on this like group chat, and we talk frequently, and these are people that I really admire. They're extremely smart, the smartest people I've ever met. And so, for example, Jerry O'Daniel from Kentucky, who you had on your show fairly recently, we were in Brazil at a conference in Sao Paulo a few months ago, and I could listen to him all day talk about facelifts and what he does and how he does it, and it's really fascinating because everyone can say that they're, a facelift surgeon and do the deep plane facelift, for example, and you get 20 surgeons and they all do it a little differently. So it's something that you can truly make it unique in your own.
Hello, it's Catherine with a quick announcement. My new book, Beauty and the Biz, the Plastic Surgery Practice Growth Playbook, is at the printer. Now, it's based on 175 interviews with top plastic surgeons across the country, what they're doing differently to convert more, retain more, and profit more. You can pre-order a copy of the book at beautyandthebizbook.com. Now, back to the show. So when you went out on your own, did you literally put the flag in the sand and said, I'm a facial, like I'm going to do face? Or when you first went out, did you do everything?
I did everything. So you've got to establish yourself as a surgeon, number one.
Mm.
And when you're out of training, you're young, you look young. I always look a little bit younger than my age. At least people tell me it's that Korean skin or Korean genetics, I think. So it's and a lot of patients want someone that's more established, so a few gray hairs, and a little bit more experience. So I did everything. I did hand surgery. So I took a call at a local hospital in Scottsdale and did hand trauma. Putting fingers back together and putting bones back together. And then the facial trauma, a lot of the things that I did during residency in my early university days as well too. So breast reconstruction, I definitely had a passion for that, and that was a big part of my practice. And a lot of those patients were my aesthetic patients. So I've kind of made a natural transition from a lot of breast reconstructive surgery, because now they wanted, now that their reconstruction was done, they wanted to look better or feel better about themselves. So they would, get a facelift, and or a tummy tuck, and so those actually became my aesthetic patients. And funny enough, I still get patients today that where they'll send an inquiry online and say, you took care of my son, 20 years ago. I think I'm ready for my facelift, and I'm going to come see you. So,
Yeah.
even my trauma work and being up at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning still pays off.
And do you still do any recon?
I really don't. I would say the only type of recon that I do is, some maybe like some simple lacerations for, my close friends. Kids are always getting hurt and falling and hitting their heads and things like that. And so occasionally I'll do that. But yeah, it's definitely reconstruction, and to like commit to doing reconstruction and doing it well. You also have to train your staff, and also be able to take insurance, and that requires more work as well too. And I really applaud the surgeons that still do that and do it well. But as you probably know, the reimbursements for reconstructive cases continues to go down. But more than that, it takes a dedicated team to really get the prior authorizations. I remember at meetings and buying these updated coding books. I'd have to code all my procedures out, and so it takes a lot of time and effort, and it takes a lot of time and effort for the staff as well too.
So you have this gorgeous office in Scottsdale, and you also, how recently did you build out an OR? So can you describe your practice and what you ended up with? Because
Yeah, that's so. Well, my when I first started my practice in Scottsdale, I had one employee. She was a medical student, answered the phones, and did everything, and I did a lot as well too. So, you talked to earlier about for me being the business owner, and but I was taking out all my own sutures. I was answering the phones myself, sending out the inquiries. I was my own marketing specialist. If there really was any marketing specialist, when I started, there wasn't any Instagram, but So I did it all, and I did it with as little staff as possible. I never took out any loans, business loans, during my practice. So it really is from the ground up, and trying to keep it as lean as possible. And so, any surgeon that comes out that's new in practice, keep things lean. You don't need, the flashy office. I certainly didn't have one. I had two rooms and a little reception area. So, and all of that was probably like less than 1,000 square feet. So,
What do you have now?
oh, well, so, I have two offices, two skin clinics. My office and one skin clinic is attached to it. So we have about 5,000 square feet. And we have a full service, med spa, injectables, lasers, skincare, and injectors and estheticians, laser techs. And then my clinical side is the other part of that office, where I see patients, consults, photography room, kind of fairly typical. And then we have a second location, which is about 15, 20 minutes away from my original location. That's in Arcadia, which is adjacent to Paradise Valley, Arizona. And so that's mostly skincare. And so it's a second med spa location. We focus on more wellness, hormone therapy, peptides, so weight loss, including weight loss. And I do see patients there like a half day a week at that location as well too. So, and then just going back to a long answer for your original question about the OR, I did build a freestanding operating room, and so it was very ambitious. It was something that I thought about several years ago, creating a truly multi-specialty surgery center. It's not attached to any of my offices. But it's in Paradise Valley, and it is 8,000 square feet on one side, and then another 8,000 for the OR side. So 16,000 square feet, which is very ambitious. And it started out with four owners, with me, kind of founding the ASC. And I brought on three partners. Then we brought on a urology group. We brought on two OB-GYN specialists, a general surgeon, orthopedic surgeon. And so, because I really did want to take insurance at the surgery center, and being able to do, multi-specialty orthopedics, urology, general surgery, gynecologic surgery. And I actually built out a kind of a colonoscopy center within that space, not knowing whether or not I could get a GI specialist or a GI group to use it. And now we do have a full-fledged colonoscopy center as well too. So
So you have four original partners. Were the
yes.
people you brought on board, were they just contractors? Like, or do you still own?
No, so two were anesthesiologists and one was an orthopedic surgeon.
Okay.
And so it's and three of them are still with the surgery center, and still part owners of the surgery center.
So would
But
you say it was a really good investment for you long term?
probably not.
Oh,
But I think eventually it will be, at several years down the road, as I continue to get dividends from my shares. But it's I never really saw it as a means to make a lot of money and build this thing and then sell it. It was a means to have a beautiful a facility for my patients. And I get a lot of patients coming from out of town. There's several hotels right around the surgery center, even one that they could even walk to from the surgery center, pre-surgery, hopefully not post-surgery. But I wanted to create this beautiful, aesthetically pleasing space that you don't really see in the hospital surgery center. So there's a lot of surgery centers, ASCs, freestanding or attached to hospitals, but it's not a whole lot of them are very inviting when you walk in as a patient. The waiting rooms are crowded. You're with people that are sometimes very very sick, and there's not any nice artwork on the walls. The furniture's got kind of broken down. The bathrooms aren't good, and so in the OR rooms are quite small. So even for the surgeons, it's they have very difficult navigating around, while they're doing surgery. So this was built to try to be something different, to try to be a disruptor in the ASC space. And so I could talk to you for like several hours about, do's and don'ts for ASCs, but any surgeon, whether they're young or old, start small. I think what I tried to do was pretty ambitious. It eventually worked out for me uh, and for my partners, but it's really daunting, especially if you're going to take insurance. It's tough to get really good contracts and reimbursements, and even breaking even. Sometimes breaking even is good, but you certainly don't want to lose money if you're getting if you're get bad contracts with an insurance company that's paying you 70 cents on a dollar for a particular case, and you have to pay your employees, and it can be pretty stressful, and it was, and but it's all good now. So things are working out very well.
Good. So now you have these two locations. I'm assuming that second location in Arcadia, was it for surgery feeder? Both assets?
Well, yeah. So I consider any med spa a surgery feeder, and that's why surgeons, especially aesthetic surgeons that do just cosmetic surgery. Uh, Not too many people. So when I started my practice 20 years ago, or I guess 18 years in private, uh, plastic surgeons did not have med spas. They had an injector here or two, but they didn't have lasers. They didn't have the estheticians that they had only did facials. They weren't running laser equipment, body tightening equipment, all these things that are available now. And other med spas were doing that. So plastic surgeons were kind of late to the game in incorporating a med spa into their practice, and so it's. But a good med spa will, give a surgeon patience, but also, I think more importantly, a good facial plastic surgeon can make or do very well successfully and have a successful med spa because every single one of those facelift patients should be going to the med spa. So, and what I mean by that is that we have a whole skin optimization protocol for my facelift patient where they're starting at the med spa about 2 months before their facelift surgery, and start prepping their skin, and then for about 2 or 3 months after their surgery, they're still getting treatments at our med spa, and that price is just built into the cost of my facelift. And so there's whether they do it or not. Sometimes, if they're from out of town, it's challenging for them to come to every single appointment before surgery and after surgery to the med spa. But it's just lymphatic treatments, hyperbaric oxygen treatments, what we call BBL, broadband light, and using light-based devices to start the cell turnover process, and doing those things post-surgery, microneedling the incision scars. All those things will make your providers in the med spa very busy. And if you do it well, it will just feed patients to the med spa and make your med spa profitable and
But that's
successful.
the secret. You have to
That
do
is
it well, and somebody's got to manage all these people and
right.
the supplies and manage the money coming in
Sure.
and going out. Have you
Sure.
found that to be challenging?
Well, I would say it was challenging until I met my wife.
Okay, good.
So, you hear about plastic surgeons and their wives coming along, and sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't. And I've known a lot of plastic surgeons where it's one or the other. And fortunately for my wife, she joined my practice when I had uh, very little a med spa. I wouldn't even call it a med spa. I had, what I described earlier with having one esthetician and one injector,
Mm.
and never and they're just using the clinic rooms that I used to see my surgery patients, and so. But she had an extensive background in operations and in running companies,
Well, that was
and
handy. Did you vet her while you were dating?
no, so that was actually a bonus. I wasn't looking for particularly anyone that could take that position, but I kind of really had to convince her to come on board. And so when we started seriously dating, and we knew we were going to get married, I think she was already with the practice for a couple months, but. She's not only extremely beautiful, but she's equally very intelligent, very smart, knows operations very well,
Mm.
knows people very well. So she, yeah, vetted every single employee that we had, and that's a pretty daunting process. I was the one that was doing it, and certainly with my little free time, it was really hard to kind of go through these candidates. And but she is fantastic. And I would say when you find a partner, or even if it's not a partner, and you find someone that you completely trust, then it certainly makes my job as a surgeon much easier. I can focus on have focus in the OR, focus on my patients, and do the surgical side, which is what I really love to do.
Yeah, well, that's the dream, to
Yes,
do
yes,
something in the OR and somebody else that you really trust
right.
runs the show, and they're in
Yeah.
the weeds and they're doing HR. I'm assuming HR is your biggest challenge because it's everyone else's, you know?
Yeah, it's the biggest challenge, but in multiple ways. So it's not always a someone's unhappy, or you end up firing someone. A lot of times for us, and in fact, the large majority of the cases for us, and the challenge of having employees is that you find someone good, and then their husband has a job in another state. And we just recently encountered that situation with our nurse practitioner,
Oh.
who is was a wonderful employee. And I say was, and I'm hoping that maybe we have a 1% chance of keeping her. But
Is she the one that's expecting?
well, no, she already had a baby, and so that's another one. So getting to the baby thing. But anyway, her husband, wants to become a commercial pilot, and it
Oh.
was tough to get enough hours, and he had trouble finding a job here. And they're from Minnesota, and he found a job back in Minnesota. So it looks like they're probably going to move back. She has like a one 2 month old now, just
Oh.
delivered a couple months ago. And so, she has a young family, and certainly, I think her husband and the pilot's potential kind of outweighed, what she was doing here. But we have it's when you're in this business, most of your employees are going to be women.
Mm.
We've had three employees have babies and be on maternity leave, and but fortunately they've all come back, which is great. But then you don't have them for about 3 months,
Yeah.
and so that's always challenging as well too. So, there's always so most of ours have been either pregnancies, or being forced to leave, or just voluntarily not being forced, but finding work somewhere else, either it be for themselves, or for their husband or spouse.
Well,
So
keep the door open for the one who went to Minneapolis because she hasn't been through a winter yet in Minnesota. She
well,
might be
she grew
great.
up there. She
Oh,
grew up
she
there, so
did.
she kind
Okay.
of knows what it's like, but she loves it here. So it's. I'm hoping that maybe. he ends up getting his license, commercial license, and comes back here. So she is an outstanding employee. So yeah, so you manage. We have probably about 13, 14 employees right now. We're continuing to grow, and our Arcadia location, we have 8 treatment rooms, and we just built that and opened in early December of last year. So we're probably only at about 20-25% utilization there. So it's definitely something that's fun. It's exciting, and but also challenging as well too.
I it can be a big mistake, a big drain, but it can also be a good feeder and a good and it just
Sure.
I think what happens is I think surgeons get bored and they just want to grow and they think that's a good idea. And
Yeah.
I've seen it go both ways. So it just
Yeah.
depends on how much you want to manage people or pay others to manage them or
Yeah.
marry somebody who wants to manage them as you yeah.
That's right. Exactly. That's
So
exactly right.
give me just one mistake that others could learn from that you got a good lesson out of.
Yeah, it's I would say kind of what I alluded to earlier. Young surgeons just try to keep your expenses low. It's you don't need that big shiny office. So you don't need the latest and greatest laser machine. You don't need to buy a hyperbaric oxygen a chamber right away. And you don't need to feel like you need to be in every single magazine. And so, before when I started practicing, it was a pre-social media. I think there was Facebook, but not too many surgeons were using it for advertising. But I would look at a magazine, say Southwest Spirit magazine, and every time I fly Southwest, I'd see that magazine and see a list of the top surgeons in the country, and said, man, I have to be in that magazine. And so you end up spending a lot of money, four, five, $6,000, which when you're not making a lot of money and expenses are tight, that's a big expense. And so I would say social media helps because you don't have to spend a lot of money and you can have such a tremendous reach. And you can have fun with social media, play around with it, but always, have good content, tasteful content. This all these people dancing and doing crazy things and on TikTok, and that's not for me, and I don't think that's a good way to go for a serious surgeon that's trying to gain credibility. And so but yeah, and no, uh, you have to learn the business side at some point. So there's a lot of firms out there that will help plastic surgeons. I know you help plastic surgeons that will really be able to show you, your bottom line and what's coming in and what's going out, and be really mindful of the expenses and the costs of goods sold. So the COGS. Things like COGS, EBITDA, profit margin. Those are the things that I didn't know when I was starting out, and even in my first 10 years of practice. You're trying to get as many cases as you can. You're trying to operate thinking that's the way you're going to make money, and it is to a certain degree, but if a lot of that is going right back out with staffing and poor compensation of staff of your providers, you can't pay an injector $50 an hour and 30% commission. You just can't do it. And there's injectors out there that will demand that, and you think, okay, well, I have to have this injector, so I'm going to pay that. But then they're using expensive products, and there's so many different injectable products. Some are very, very highly very expensive, to ones that aren't, that do just as well. And so, just even knowing, like, what fillers are the high end expensive versus the low end. You certainly want to give a patient a good product, and but there's a lot of good products where you don't have to pay arm and a leg to purchase. And but it's so you may be paying your providers and all this money. I think, and they're bringing in all this income, and you think you're doing great, but then you see that you're breaking even or actually losing money, and so all those things are super important early on, because I certainly made all those mistakes in early in my practice, and not knowing what the bottom line is. What's the net profit for a surgeon? What should you be? What's your net? So say just on the clinical and not even the med spa. Say you don't have a med spa. What's a good profit margin? And I would say most surgeons don't know that. What is a average med spa? What's their profit margin? And so it's like a restaurant. It's when you have a med spa, you may be making a lot of money, but there's a lot of expenses, and a lot more expenses on the med spa than there are on the surgical side. And so, if your profit margin is say less than 15%, then you got to kind of look at your numbers again, and look at your provider compensation again, and see, a good restaurant should be making like 6%. A great restaurant is like 10, 12%. A bad restaurant is like 3%. And med spas are the same. So, you gotta know, what's making money and what's losing you money.
Well, a huge line item can be the patient attraction piece to that.
Yeah.
What is it costing you to attract a new patient? And that's
Yes.
what I'm always looking at. For God's sakes, if you spend a fortune attracting them,
Yeah.
lose them. Because the best part about our industry is we women, especially that are vain, and I would be one of them. I'll go up and down that ladder every day, all day for the rest of my life. Today it's surgery, tomorrow it's non-surgical. I go up
Right.
and down. I call it the long tail patient. Just hang on to them. Don't.
Yes.
The problem is everyone's churning. Like this industry has gotten so fast, and then discounts entered the whole story.
Yeah.
It got
Right.
really nasty quick.
Yeah.
So regarding patient attraction, do you have a marketing machine set up that's feeding all the three pieces?
Yeah. So, by the way, I don't like that D word, discount. So we don't use that word in our practice, and so it's yeah, it's multi-tiered, and so we run the numbers every single month. And when you talk about patient acquisition costs, and we go through, okay, so how many patients didn't come back in the last 12 months? How many patients did not? They came once and didn't come back. And how much did we spend for that patient, and how much are we still spending for that patient for a new patient? And as you said, it's so much easier to keep the patient that you already acquired than trying to get a new patient. And so, so all those things that I didn't know about a few years ago, because that was when I really started studying the P&Ls, and really studying the COGS, and really studying provider compensation. But we do have an in-house marketer. That was something that we decided several years ago, that we needed a full-time. First, it was like kind of a full-time social media person. So someone that's younger, savvy, knows Instagram, knows how to do all these different cool stuff that you can do on Instagram and TikTok and all that stuff, and help us put posts together, not only for our providers, but also our surgical before and afters. If you see like my Instagram, for example, we'll take the photos in our photo room, all high res, high resolution, and then she puts it into the Instagram friendly format, and she'll put the ones side by side. So I'll say, hey, can you take patient X? We just did high resolution photos on her. She's 6 months out. Just put the before and afters together, and then we'll put a post together. So as far as the caption, it'll come mostly from me, where I'm still involved in controlling, make sure it's in my voice. But then I'll sometimes give her direction on that. But she can provide. She can follow around the laser techs. She can follow around the injectors. She now, helps put our events together. So we have multiple events throughout the year, in-person events. We had a grand opening for our new clinic earlier this year. So, she's reaching out to, different people that will come in, help us, caterers and so forth. But also, something that's big in marketing right now are influencers. So you have the celebrity influencers, obviously, like the Kardashians, and, whatever they sell just kind of turns to gold. But, we try to find like local influencers that have a good following. They could be younger if we're trying to, promote some sort of product to a younger demographic, but also older influencers as well too, or I should say more seasoned, patients that we're trying to put things together. We'll invite influencers to bring 7 or 8 of their friends. Our second clinic is actually on the bottom floor of a real luxury high-rise apartment complex. So we've done events for them, try to create a separate membership for them as well too. So because all they have to do is just go downstairs to our skin clinic, and so if you're not capitalizing on those patients, then you're not really thinking ahead. And those types of things that are all part of our marketing. And we do some Facebook ads, Instagram ads, but I would say we do about 70-80% of what we do in marketing we do in-house with our team. And then we do use a website company. We've been with them for probably like 10 years, and so they put those Google ads together.
Got it. So, but if anybody wanted to get a hold of you, your website is Admire Plastic Surgery. Great name. Your Instagram is also Admire Plastic Surgery. Everybody, that's going to wrap it up for us today. If you would please review and subscribe to Beauty and the Biz podcast, that would help me grow the audience. I really appreciate it. And then if you've got any questions or feedback for me, or you want to check out my new book, please go to CatherineMaley.com, or you can certainly DM me on Instagram at Catherine Maley MBA. Thanks so much, and we'll talk again soon. Hello, it's Catherine. If your practice feels busy but you're not seeing the growth you expected, there's usually a reason, and it's often something small that's quietly costing you revenue. That's why I offer a practice growth review. Now in this call, I'll take an objective look at your patient flow, conversion process, and retention strategies to identify where opportunities may be slipping through the cracks. You'll walk away with a clear picture of what's working, what's not, and the few changes that could make the biggest difference. If you'd like an unbiased set of expert eyes on your practice, simply visit CatherineMaley.com to schedule your review.